Yes, hello once again and welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and today we're here at Finavon in Forfar. Yes, hello, thanks again for joining me here on Classic Dirt Bike TV, and as you can see we've moved to the great outdoors to cover our first race event of 2023, and we've moved up to Finavon Hill in Forfar in Angus to cover round one of the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club's brand new championship. Now, as you can see, it's a bit misty and overcast at the moment, and hopefully the weather will improve as the day goes on, because we do have some good racing lined up for you today. We have classes from pre-1968, the vintage bikes. We have also the pre-1975 machines, and of course those pre-1984 or twin shock bikes as they were more commonly known. And we'll also have some racing from those little Evolution 125s on the pre-1990s class. So it's all happening here up at Finavon Hill, but before we get down to any racing, let's do our usual walk around the paddock and just take a look at some of those very nice bikes that are soon to take part in this round one event here at Finavon Hill.
Okay, so to kick off our first paddock walkabout of 2023, we're going to start with Brian Hamilton's RM 500 Suzuki, which I'm sure isn't a fully original bike, but nevertheless it's still quite good to see one of these big RM 500s still take to the track. And with regards the actual year on Brian's bike, I'm not entirely sure, although Brian did tell me on the day, but as usual my mind was elsewhere and I wasn't really paying attention once again. So this RM 500 two-stroke motor, as I remember, was okay, but nowhere near as quick as the competition of its day, which is more than why I think that this is likely to be a mid-1980s bike, although I'm sure Suzuki were using the much more modern single monoshock rear suspension by this time. So it might be another one of those hybrid monoshockers that's been turned back into a twin shock. But once again, I'm sure it was Suzuki's full floater rear swing arm that was bolted onto the back of these RM frames in the mid-1980s, and it certainly looks like Brian's bike's a combination of different parts, but then again it could be that these twin shocks and rear swing arm are correct, and that it's maybe even a different frame that Brian has on his bike. But as I said, Brian did tell me on the day one or two details about his machine, but the information kind of got lost in transition, so to speak, which is really just a posh excuse for me trying to say that I just wasn't paying attention. But nevertheless, this big 500 RM certainly looks the business, and it should be fast enough to propel Brian around the Finavon racetrack when he races this bike in the pre-1984 class. Now, here's a bike that you certainly don't see every day at a classic or vintage race event, and this bike here is the latest acquisition from John Porteous, and this is John's lovely Italian SWM 370 twin shocker. Now, in the past, we've covered many bikes that John's purchased down the years, and it's quite fair to say that they've all been very good bikes and quite high quality, but this Italian SWM 370 is in fantastic original condition, and it's going to be great to see one of these bikes take to the track once again. But SWM, or Speedy Working Motors as they're sometimes known, were founded by Piero Cerroni and Fausto Vergani in Milan in Italy around 1971, and actually they began by making small capacity 50cc off-road motorcycles using a German Sachs motor until sometime later at the end of the 1970s. They then got into off-road trials and enduro bikes using bigger 125 and 320cc Rotax engines. And as you can see, our particular SWM here has a 370 two-stroke Rotax engine, and I know it says SWM on the casing, but it was Rotax who made these motors for quite a lot of different bike manufacturers at this time, which then usually put their own logo on the casings, but essentially they were all still Austrian-built Rotax engines. But it was a reasonably light steel chassis and swing arm on these SWMs with an alloy hub on both the back and at the front wheels, and it was also old school drum brakes as well that were used to slow the bike down. But make no mistake, these SWMs and these 370s in particular were very quick bikes because of that quite good chassis and the Rotax two-stroke engine, and if you had the right rider astride this saddle, it certainly made these Italian stallions very competitive and certainly able to put the rider on one of the first three steps of the podium. But again, another nice bike from John Porteous. Now, this next featured bike is John's second machine, and this is his C&J Honda that John uses as a backup machine, and once again it's another nice little vintage racer with the Honda 4-stroke motor and the American-made steel C&J chassis. So basically the bike is made up from the C&J chassis and swing arm, and then you just bolt on whatever front and rear suspension that takes your fancy. But most of these C&J frames are all built to order and to accept whichever motor you decide to put into it, which in our particular case here is a Honda 350 4-stroker, which has been bored out to 500cc. So there should be enough horses inside this engine to propel John around the undulating Finavon hillside racetrack. But it looks like quite a substantial Mikuni carburetor there to feed that big 500 with the fuel it requires. But again, as I recall, these Honda 500s or 350s in its stock trim were very good, strong and reliable motors, although I have to say I've heard instances in the past where others have bored out these 350s to 500s just to get some more grunt out of them, but then the motors started stripping gearboxes as it was found out that the transmissions just couldn't cope with the increase in horsepower. But hopefully John's bike won't suffer from that ailment, and it'll work out just fine. But it was certainly quite a good turnout of bikes for this round one event here at Finavon Hill in Forfar, and These few examples that we're going to see in this video were just a select few from around the paddock on the day. But once again, this is another very nice C&J 500 Honda from the John Porteous stable. So next up, we're going to take a quick look around Billy Pentland's 1975 Montesa 250 Capra, which Billy tells me is just one of two identical bikes that he's recently acquired, and this one here is the first one that he's prepped to get it ready in time to race at this Forfar event. Now, Billy told me that this bike came complete with the original Capra 250 version 1975 plate that was fitted to the bike when it was sitting on the showroom floor more than 48 years ago. But once more, it's another quite original looking bike. Okay, it may not be 100% authentic because of its different handlebars and controls, but it still looks like it has many of its 1975 parts still intact. And again, we have the Spanish-made 250 piston port two-stroke motor, which I can see has a modern-style Japanese Mikuni carburetor fitted onto it. I'm pretty sure that it would have been something like a Bing carburetor that would have been a stock fitting on these 75 250s. And also you can see that forward folding kickstart, which was certainly a bit of a trademark on these Montesas, but again, quite good motors for a European two-stroker, and for the mid-1970s, quite competitive, and they did sell quite well in Europe, although you'd be quite hard-pressed to see one on a racetrack these days, and Billy will certainly be putting that right when he takes to the track here at Finavon. But these old Spanish Montesas certainly had one of the nicest shaped fuel tanks on a mid-1970s motocrosser, made from fiberglass, of course, because these were the days before plastic was the material of choice for all off-road motorcycle manufacturers. Now, at the back of Billy's Montesa, it was a pair of beater piggyback shocks, which I think were quite similar to the suspension units that were bolted onto the Spanish Bultacos of their day. And now, I also suspect that these weren't up to much in terms of their function and quality, but you have to remember that this was still 1975, and this was the suspension technology of its day. But certainly the bike still has its stock Montesa forks and drum brake at the front, and quite a substantial rear drive sprocket here at the back, just to get the gearing absolutely correct for that 250 two-stroke motor. Although for me, personally speaking, I think it's great that we can still take a look at these rarer race bikes like these Montesas in their natural habitat, because let's face it, when was the last time that you saw a Montesa racing at any kind of classic race meeting? And hopefully Billy will put that right when we see this iconic Montesa ride once again here at Finavon. Okay, so next up it's the turn of Andy Mallock's old CZ twin shocker, or CZ for our American viewers, as I'm led to believe that you guys out there in the United States call these CZs, but us backward Europeans have always referred to them as simply CZs. Now, once more, I'm not entirely sure, but I think this is a 360 or possibly even a 380, but this is just one of the many bikes that Andy brings along to these Scottish classic events, with his other machines being his Montesa and his 1983 four-banger 500 Armstrong. Now, if you're familiar with your Czechoslovakian CZ machines, then you'll already know just how quick and powerful these piston port CZ two-stroke motors are. And you can see that this engine here of Andy's has had the new gearbox linkage system fitted, which basically eliminates the long throw that's normally associated with these CZ gearboxes and make it shift as good as, or some say even better than, a Japanese equivalent motor. But it certainly looks like Andy's stocking up on rear drive sprockets for his CZ, with a couple of brand new parts there waiting their turn to go onto the bike. But it was usually quite easy enough to see how much gas you had in these plastic CZ fuel cells with this semi-translucent see-through construction. And at the back of our twin-shock racer, it was a pair of British-made rock shocks that were part of the bike's rear suspension system. And once more, at the front of these old CZ, the forks were still quite good for their day and for a 1970s design. Now, they weren't the worst suspension systems on the planet, and these front and rear brakes also were quite good stoppers for an old school drum brake system. Although, as I said, this CZ is just one of the three bikes that Andy will be riding here at Forfar, so in the forthcoming racing videos you're surely to catch a glimpse of Andy riding at least one or possibly two from his assortment of race machines. Now, of course, you can't wander around a classic motocross paddock without bumping into an old Myco or two, and this fantastic example here is Mike van der Meer's 1981 250 Mega 2, the baby brother, of course, to the much bigger 490. And again, it was a two-stroke reed valve motor that powered our 250, and this engine here was another fantastic power plant, which I can personally relate to, because I did have the exact same engine in my old Myco back in the day. But on Mike's 250 you can see that he's gone for a much more modern Mikuni carburetor on his bike, rather than the old school Bings that were bolted onto these motors in 1981. And as you can see at the back of our Myco 250, it's a pair of quite good quality YSS piggyback rear shocks, which once again are a million times better than those old Corticoso Italian items that probably would have been fitted to this bike in that year. And again, this alloy box section type rear swing arm is a direct replacement for what would have been a tubular steel swing arm that was fitted in that year. Now, whether it was this Fix Off-Road who actually manufactured it or supplied it, I don't exactly know. But the motor's expansion chamber appears to be the original, and it's still in quite good condition after 42 years on the track. But as I said, another very good example of one of these iconic twin shockers from 1981. Now naturally it's not as fast and as brutal as its big brother, the 490, but certainly a perfect choice as a club racer's twin shocker. And so from a relatively small 250 to a big brutal 500, and this 1984 CR500 Honda is James Haddow's race bike for this round one here at Forfar. Now again, this is another one of those hybrid bikes that have had a bit of re-engineering to the chassis to enable it to take this big 500 two-stroke motor and the double twin shock suspension at the rear. And if it's out and out raw arm wrenching power that you want, then this Honda CR500 has it in absolute bucket loads. But to be fair, this big reed valve two-stroker probably has much more power than your average club rider could handle, and it's only psychopaths and adrenaline junkies who can hold the throttle open in top gear on one of these puppies. But don't let me put you off, because if you want to scare yourself shitless, then these big bruisers of an engine will certainly accommodate you. But once again, and as in our previous Myco, another good quality pair of YSS piggyback rear shocks to try and keep the back end of our Honda firmly on the ground. And I'm pretty sure that this alloy box section rear swing arm is a modified monoshock part that's been re-engineered to take this dual twin shock setup here at the rear. Although without doubt this is still a lot of bike for a young lad such as James, and it was only last year that I was watching James race a little 125 CR in the pre-1990 class, so this is certainly a big step up for James from that buzzy little 125 onto this much bigger 500. So I hope he's been working out and building up those youth-like arm muscles, because he's certainly going to need them when he slings his leg over this big beauty. Now this was another nice old classic that I spotted on my travels, and this nice 500 Rickman Matisse belonged to Willie Mills, another one of those endearing pre-1968 bikes that are so popular at vintage race events nowadays. And this featured model is powered by this twin cylinder 500 Triumph motor, which has a cracking sound from those twin pipes. No silencers, of course, just a single pipe on either side of the bike that put out a fantastic brap when that 500 twin cylinder motor got fired up. But certainly a great little engine, and perfectly suited for these hand-built Rickman frames. But of course you can get a Rickman chassis to suit almost any kind of 4-stroke or 2-stroke power plant, and the Rickman frames usually come with the frame, swing arm, tank, seat and all the bodywork, and then you just add the front and rear suspension of your choice to complete the bike. Now this next trio of machines was a very nice threesome that were sitting proudly on display in the paddock, and these nice collection of Honda CR125s belonged to the Martin family, with Dad Alex there on the right and young Peter there on the left. And apparently these guys said that they're big fans of my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel, and they say that there's hardly a day goes by when they're not watching something associated with my YouTube internet channel. And they brought these bikes along, hoping to get them featured here on my channel. So firstly, thanks for your commitment, guys, and I'm more than very happy to showcase your bikes. And if I ever start up my own fan club, then remind me to make sure that you're both president and treasurer. Now, as you can see, all three of these bikes were immaculately turned out, and most of them seem to have undergone some kind of restoration or refurbishment lately. And I was also told that the guys have some other rare vintage bikes in their collection at home, including Italian Ancelottis and the like. So it looks like I've found another good contact for material for future bike features here on CDB TV. But this bike here, I'm sure, is a late 1970s model, and to be fair, I was actually told the year on the day, but again, the information was lost in conversation. But for sure, this beautifully engineered alloy side casing, certainly not an original Honda part, but having said that, I expect that components for these smaller CRs aren't exactly easy to come by these days. And anyhow, this billet alloy part is certainly much nicer than the Honda original. And once more, a nice compact liquid cooled 125 Honda motor, which I think looks like it could possibly be a 1982 bike or thereabouts, but don't quote me on that fact, as I'm in guessing mode once again, and maybe that'll teach me to listen a little bit better in the future. But this particular CR125 certainly been refurbished to a very high standard, although I've just got one criticism where the guys have let me down ever so slightly by fitting black wheels onto a vintage bike, which is just a little pet hate of mine, but it's not so much of a personal criticism, it's more of just a personal observation. But this other little CR125 was another well turned out machine, and I'm sure that this could be a 1980 model, and once again in fantastic condition. And I'm sure that this was young Peter's race bike for the day. And this time we have the Honda air-cooled motor, which, as I recall, was quite a compact little power plant, as I remember, and as long as you kept the motor buzzing and danced up and down on the gearbox, you could certainly get quite a decent performance of this little motor. But this is certainly more like it, a good pair of SM Pro Gold anodised wheels, not the stock originals, of course, but way better than those black items that we saw on the previous bike. But again, if you check out the racing from this round one event at Forfar, you should be able to see this little Honda perform out there on the racetrack. But also included in this trio of CR125s was this other liquid cooled bike, which was another cracker from the Martin team, and this bike here, of course, is a later model with that liquid cooled engine and disc brakes on both the front and at the rear. But for such a small engine, these little CRs didn't half pack a punch. And once more, you can see another substitute for the original plastic tank is this nicely sculpted alloy fuel cell. But certainly the guys have put in a lot of effort to bring these bikes to Forfar, and I personally applaud their commitment and of course their loyalty to my CDB TV channel. And all three of these CRs are certainly without doubt worthy of their place in my video archives. Now this next item was quite nice to see in the Forfar paddock, and this is Ken Suter's Rind Tut Wasp sidecar outfit from the early 1960s. And Ken told me that this was one of the very early RT1 chassis that Rind Tut built back in the day. Now of course this outfit wasn't taking part in the day's racing. Ken just brought it along as a bit of a talking point, although he was seen riding it around the perimeter of the track later in the day. Now this particular outfit is powered by a 650cc Triumph motor, and the gearbox was an AMC unit, although many other of these Wasp outfits were powered by the legendary Norton motors. Now at the front it was this twin shock leading link kind of configuration, and a big drum brake there to do all of the stopping on this quite heavy rig. But basically the chassis was a tubular steel kind of construction, and it was the passenger's job to balance the outfit going into the turns, and it was a pretty rough ride standing and sitting in the seat of one of these three-wheelers, and it certainly sorted out the men from the wimps when you took it on to a bumpy track. But when you had 20 or 30 or so of these outfits racing around a scrambles track, it was certainly a sight and a sound to see and hear. But there are still sidecar motocross events still taking place in the south of the UK, but none unfortunately here in the north. But if you ever do get a chance to attend one of these three-wheeler sidecar events, then do go along, because it's an experience that you'll certainly never ever forget. Now this is a bike that I certainly recognise from some years back, as I initially filmed this race bike back in 2017, and apparently it's changed hands a couple of times since then, and this time round it's now owned and raced by Patrick Pollard. Although 6 years ago the bike did look slightly fresher after its recent refurbishment, but then again it's been raced many times since then, so you've got to expect it to have lost its new patina by now. But essentially it's a 1973 Yamaha MX 360, and I see it still has the exact same black wheels that were fitted onto it from back in 2017. But having said that, it still looks okay after 6 years of battering on the track. And as I remember, these 360 Yamaha reed valve motors were quite good power plants for their time, and I'm sure that they had a bore of around 80 millimeters and a stroke of about 70 millimeters, and I think they also had a 5-speed gearbox, so there were plenty cogs there to play with inside these Yamaha crankcases. But as you've already gathered, this bike here is maybe not a fully stock machine from 1973, because it does have a couple of bits and pieces that are maybe not correct, but it's still great to see that the bike's being used since the last time I clapped my eyes on it 6 years ago, because many of these kind of older classics tend to undergo restorations or refurbishments, and then they just get locked away in private collections, never to be seen again. So it's a big well done to Patrick for keeping the bike out there on the track, and if he ever decides to do another restoration on the bike, then maybe CDB TV will take another look at it. Okay, so just to finish off our little walk through this round one paddock at Forfar, we're going to finish off by taking a look at Gordon Forbes's old 1970s Michael twin choker. Now, on the day, I'm pretty sure that Gordon told me that this was a 1978 model, but then again, my memory isn't what it used to be, and maybe I should be paying a little bit more attention to the information I'm being supplied with on the day. But you certainly can't beat an old German Michael for a competitive weekend race bike, and as old as these bikes are, they can still keep up with much more modern machinery on the track. That is, of course, provided you can keep them going, because these older Michael motors certainly take a lot of looking after to keep them reliable. But it certainly looks like Big Gordon's been putting his hand in his wallet and splashing out on a brand new DEP expansion chamber, and I expect it won't be too long before this nice looking pipes all covered in dings and dents from the racetrack, which is probably why Gordon's taken the time to fit this aluminium exhaust guard, just to try and keep stones and other debris from damaging his brand new pipe. But as I said, these examples that we're looking at here in this video are just a few select machines from the big entry of bikes that we had for this round one event at Forfar. And you can see all of these bikes and many more like them take to the track if you watch the racing footage, which will be posted just shortly. And so there you have it, another old Michael classic for you there. That's Gordon Forbes's machine, one of the many who will be taking to the Finavon Hill racetrack for this very first round one event of 2023.
Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed taking a look at some of those nice vintage classics from around the paddock here at this round one event at Forfar. And don't forget, you can see all of these bikes in action on the racetrack in a future video here on my YouTube channel. And in fact, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll also be heading to the south of the country to cover another big classic racing event, and that will be the Kendal Classic Revival Scramble, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And once again, you can see all of the bikes and all of the racing from that event by just simply subscribing to my channel. But until the next time, it's goodbye just now from this round one event here at Forfar.